This video is the first installment of a 9-part video series chronicling a 9-day bike trip that I did throughout rural Ontario. For this trip I'm taking my early 2000s linear recumbent bike, and I got a rack on the back with panniers on both sides. Both are waterproof giant panniers, and on the top I've got my tent, which is wrapped in a foam sleeping pad. The total weight of this cargo was about 43 pounds. So today is Saturday the 19th of May 2018, and although I had ambitions of leaving for my trip at around 6 a.m., when I woke up there was a lot of rain outside, and looking at the forecast it showed that it was supposed to rain for most of the morning, but then there should be a break in the weather a little bit later on. So that break in the weather came at around 10 a.m., so here I am at 10:15 pulling away from the garage in my apartment building. Outside there was a little bit of rain falling, but it was very minimal. So I live in a neighborhood known as the Annex, which is in downtown Toronto, and the beginning of my journey was to ride south down to Union Station. Once inside Union Station, I found my way to the Lakeshore West train and took the train to the Burlington GO station. So although I really love riding my bike in the city, and I also really love riding my bike out in the country, I've never been a big fan of riding through the suburbs. The vast majority of the suburbs which border Toronto mostly have roads which are really not very safe for cyclists to ride on. Having done a similar bike trip to this in the past, my experience was that the first and last day of the trip riding through those suburbs were by far my least favorite days. So this time around I decided to cheat a little bit by starting and ending the trip by taking a 1-hour GO train ride. Effectively by doing this I was able to replace 2 unenjoyable days of suburban riding with 2 bonus extra days of riding out in the country. So starting from Toronto's Union Station, this train took me west through the municipalities of Mississauga, Oakville, and Burlington is where I got off. The Burlington GO station seems to have been recently rebuilt, although there's a major deficiency that I noticed, which is that the building doesn't have a single drinking fountain anywhere in it. So that meant I wasn't able to top off my water bottles before leaving for my ride for the day. So my ride for day 1 starting in Burlington took me in the southeast direction, following along the coast of Lake Ontario before going a little bit further south and finally ending up in Niagara Falls. So in Burlington I started on Fairview Street and then made a left turn onto Brant Street, which took me down through Burlington's downtown. The weather in Burlington was really similar to Toronto, with just a little bit of light rain. Within no time I was down near Lake Ontario and ready to start riding the Waterfront Trail. The first stretch along here was pretty neat. It had been painted nicely and you're riding up right beside the water. It's now right around noon, and as you can see it's quite foggy. As you can see from the spots on my camera lens, by this point the rain had started to pick up again. The massive elevated road structure you can see here is known as the Burlington Skyway. It bridges the gap across the inlet into the Burlington Bay, which is where many large ships pass through to serve the industry in the city of Hamilton. The Waterfront Trail, however, doesn't use the Skyway. It instead uses the Burlington Canal lift bridge. First you pass underneath the bridge, then you climb up on top and ride across. So after crossing the bridge, we've now entered a new municipality. We're now in the city of Hamilton. I was really amazed by how enormously wide this section of the Waterfront Trail was. All of a sudden the rain really started to pick up, but luckily I was able to escape it temporarily underneath this picnic shelter. I put on my rain jacket and continued riding, but eventually the rain picked up even more and I had to stop again to put on my rain pants as well. Eventually the Waterfront Trail pathway ended, and then I was riding along city streets following the signed bike route. Some of the sections of the route were along the North Service Road, which goes right next to the QEW highway. The road we're on now is called Winston Road, and the land between there and Lake Ontario has a cluster of 8 tall radio antennas. On a clear night I can actually see those radio antennas blinking from the window of my apartment in downtown Toronto. As the rain persisted, I rode across the QEW on the Casablanca Boulevard overpass. From there I rode into the town of Grimsby along Livingston Avenue. Grimsby has a short, historic downtown strip. By this point the rain had mostly started to clear up again, so I decided to stop for lunch in Grimsby's Centennial Park. My lunch consisted of chicken salad sandwiches and chili chicken, both of which were leftovers that were in my fridge when I was leaving. From there I continued riding along Grimsby's main street until I entered the town of Lincoln, which is part of the Niagara Region. The Niagara Region is known for its production of fruits, and almost right away I was seeing apple orchards and vineyards. From the main road I rode through a traffic circle and joined a road called Green Lane Road. With the rain having now fully cleared up and it starting to warm up a lot, there's a lot of mist coming off all the fields, which looked really neat. By this point in the trip I didn't have the settings on my GPS optimized quite properly, which meant that it ended up taking me on a little bit of a detour through this industrial area before joining back onto Green Lane Road. This was the first of many quiet country roads that I got to enjoy on this wonderful trip. I ended up picking a really great time to pass through this area of the province because many of the fruit trees were in full bloom. Eventually Green Lane Road ended and I took a right turn onto Victoria Avenue, which headed in the south direction. This road had considerably more vehicles on it, but at least it had a bike lane. By now the sun was shining brightly, the road was almost completely dry, and I was starting to get really warm underneath my rain gear. Now I'm entering into the community of Vineland. I decided to stop here to take off my raincoat and rain pants. They were still slightly damp and I didn't want to put them inside of my dry panniers, so I strapped them onto the back and let them flap in the wind, which would hopefully help them dry faster. I took a left at King Street and headed west down into a valley which took me towards the community of Jordan. Once at the bottom of the valley, I started climbing back up the other side and eventually reached the community of Jordan. At this point, King Street follows right along the edge of the Niagara Escarpment, which slopes upwards towards our right-hand side. There were lots more vineyards in this area as well. Virtually all the places that I passed through on this trip were places that I had never been to before, so it was really interesting seeing all this scenery for the very first time. This was another hill that I got to ride down, and then I had the pleasure of climbing right back up the other side. But at the top of that hill I was rewarded with the Welcome to the City of St. Catharines sign. On the outskirts of St. Catharines there were some horse farms with white painted fences. The Ontario provincial election is currently underway, and it was really interesting passing through all of the different ridings and seeing the different candidates' names on the signs. To get to my final destination, which was Niagara Falls, it would have been possible for me to bypass the city of St. Catharines. However, since I had never been there before, I instead decided to detour and go right through the downtown of St. Catharines before heading further south towards Niagara Falls. Heading into downtown St. Catharines, I got to ride along this really neat arch bridge which spans the 12-mile creek. The main street in St. Catharines is called St. Paul Street. From what I saw of it, St. Catharines has a really nice little downtown. After having left Hamilton earlier in the day, St. Catharines will be the largest city that I passed through on my 9-day trip. I made a right turn when I got to Church Street and headed in the west direction. Church Street eventually changes names and becomes Queenston Street. I then made another right turn when I got to Hartsel Road, which took me down in the south direction. This road also changes names and becomes called Merritt Street. This street took me up a long hill, which led into the adjoining city of Thorold. The reason there was so much hill climbing here is because this is where I climbed to the top of the Niagara Escarpment. Thorold also had a nice historic downtown, and it was built along this steep street. I briefly passed through a park called Battle of Beaver Dams. I then made my way towards the Thorold Tunnel. Built in the 1960s, this 850-meter long tunnel crosses underneath the Welland Canal. The Welland Canal is a critical link allowing ships to be able to pass between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie by bypassing Niagara Falls. I had never ridden my bike anywhere like that in my entire life, and it was by far the coolest place that I rode today. The tunnel slopes down towards the middle, so it was a fair bit of a climb to get back out the other side. After that I was back out in the country again, and I rode along the paved shoulder of Thorold Stone Road. I made a right turn at Garner Road and headed in the south direction. After a pretty miserable rainy start, it had really turned into a nice blue sky day. I made a left turn when I got to Lundys Lane, and rode a very short distance along there before I arrived at my campground for the night. So I spent the night at the Niagara Falls KOA holiday. KOA is a campground franchise which exists all across North America. They're very family oriented, and I was really impressed with all the amenities that they offered there. So this is my campsite for the night, and almost right away I got to work pitching my tent. I arrived at around 5 p.m. and by that point the grass was almost completely dry, which was really nice. After unpacking some of my stuff into the tent, I got back onto my bike and headed off in search of a place to have dinner. Being that the campground is located on Lundys Lane, there's a very large selection of restaurants within a short distance from there. This evening I was having a craving for Thai food, so I ended up going to this restaurant called My Thai Cuisine. I decided to order the curry pad Thai along with a Thai iced tea. Both were delicious. After dinner, I went across the street to the Freshco grocery store to grab a few items for the trip ahead. Back at the campground, I locked up my bike inside of the park's storage garage for the night. The staff convinced me that it was a good idea to do that because there had been a lot of bike thefts in the Niagara Falls area, but the added bonus was that it had started to rain then, and I knew my bike would stay dry overnight. After a great day of riding, I decided to jump into the pool and had a nice swim. After getting out and having a quick shower, I headed down to the campground's pavilion where they had a live band performing. They sounded great and I really enjoyed it. While I was watching the band, I ate a small celebration cake that I bought from the grocery store. It also rained really hard for about 15 minutes while I was under the pavilion, but that was the end of the rain for the night. So on day one, I rode my bike approximately 100 kilometers from Burlington to the outskirts of the city of Niagara Falls. If you're interested in learning more about the exact route that I took, check out the Strava link in the description below. Stay tuned for part 2 of this 9-part video series, where tomorrow I'll ride my bike down to the Niagara Falls waterfalls, follow the Niagara River down to Lake Erie, and then follow the Waterfront Trail west to Rock Point Provincial Park, which is just outside the town of Dunnville. I hope you enjoyed joining me on this great day of riding. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought, and thanks for watching.